I learned the price of doing the right thing when my father-in-law told me I had 30 minutes to leave a building I helped keep standing. He said it calmly, tapping his watch, while two security guards waited by the door. My phone buzzed on the table, face down, again and again. I started packing my laptop, my notebook, the key card I'd paid for myself. Someone had moved my family photo an inch to the left. That was when I understood none of this was an accident, and nothing I trusted was safe anymore. I learned the price of doing the right thing when my father-in-law told me I had 30 minutes to leave a building I helped keep standing. He stood at the head of the conference table like he owned the air in the room, which on paper he did. Richard Davenport, founder and chairman of Davenport Communities, the man whose name was stamped on the lobby marble and the holiday cards and the scholarship plaques, looked at me the way you look at a dented rental car you don't feel like paying for. 30 minutes, he said, tapping the face of his watch with one knuckle. That's generous. Don't make this difficult. It was 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. The windows behind him showed downtown Chicago in a flat winter light. The river, a hard strip of gray. The room smelled like burnt coffee and whatever citrus cleaner facilities used on the glass walls. On the screen behind me was the first slide of my presentation. Frozen mid-title, West Halsted Housing Trust, Quarterly Compliance Update. I had clicked it up 10 minutes earlier, thinking I was about to do my job. On the right, two security guards waited by the door. One was tall with a shaved head, hands clasped in front like he was guarding a courthouse. The other was younger, jaw tight, trying not to look at me. Their radios made tiny crackling sounds every few seconds, like insects. My phone buzzed on the table, face down. Again. Then again. I didn't flip it over. The sound drilled into my ribs anyway. The vibration felt personal, like someone knocking on a door inside my chest. Around the table, the leadership team kept their eyes busy. CFO staring at his iPad like it might catch fire. HR director, smoothing the same corner of her folder, over and over. Legal counsel, holding a pen but not writing. Everyone had a copy of my agenda in front of them. Nobody touched it. Brooke Halstead sat in my chair at the far end of the table. My chair. It had a small tear on the left armrest from when I caught my bracelet on it during a late-night budget run last spring. I'd meant to tape it. I never did. Brooke had her legs crossed, ankle bouncing, nails glossy pale pink. She held a ceramic mug I recognized because I'd bought it for myself at the museum gift shop on a Saturday. I couldn't afford to take off. It said Chicago is home in block letters. She sipped from it like it was hers. Is there a reason security is here? I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. My throat felt like I'd swallowed paper. Richard didn't answer the question. He didn't have to. He lifted a manila envelope and set it on the table in front of the HR director with two fingers like it was contaminated. The envelope had my name typed in the center, Maya Torres. Under it, in smaller print, Director, Trust Compliance. Your access is being terminated, he said. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. A silent click sounded from somewhere in the room. I looked down at my badge clipped to my blazer pocket. The tiny green light that usually blinked once every minute was dark. I couldn't make the words fit the world I was seeing. I had been in this building before sunrise. I'd let myself in with that badge at 6:38 a.m., nodding at the lobby receptionist, clutching a paper cup of coffee and my laptop bag. I'd ridden the elevator up to the 21st floor and unlocked my office, because the lock was a cheap one I'd asked for after a reporter tried to walk into my workspace last summer. I'd printed the handouts for this meeting on the printer that jammed if you fed it more than 20 pages at a time. I'd smoothed the pages into neat stacks. Now I was being told I didn't belong here. Why? I asked. Brooke's lips curved slightly, not a smile, more like a decision. Richard leaned forward, resting both palms on the conference table. His wedding band glinted under the fluorescent lights. That ring had been on the hand that shook mine at my wedding reception, the hand that patted my shoulder and called me a blessing for our family. I remembered the exact feel of it. Too heavy, too sure. You've been difficult, he said. You've refused to cooperate with a straightforward transition. You've created unnecessary friction with our partners, and you've mishandled critical documentation related to West Halsted. West Halsted. The property I'd spent 2 years bringing into existence on paper, and another year keeping alive through inspectors, contractors, grant deadlines, and neighborhood meetings where strangers yelled at me like I was personally responsible for their rent going up. West Halsted wasn't a condo tower or a boutique hotel. It was a trust unit set aside for families who had nowhere else to go, funded by federal money and state matching programs, buried under a mountain of rules that didn't care about anyone's last name. I didn't mishandle anything, I said. The legal counsel finally looked up. His face had that pale, tight look people get when they want you to stop talking for your own good. Richard tapped his watch again. 9:13. "I'm not debating," he said. "This is not a hearing. It's a decision. 30 minutes." The HR director slid the manila envelope toward me with both hands, like she was offering communion. Her eyes were glossy. She'd been the one who came to my office last month when Brooke tried to take over my team's shared drive by accident. She'd whispered, "Be careful," and then walked away like she'd said too much. I didn't reach for the envelope. My phone buzzed again. I felt the tremor travel through the table into my forearms. One of the security guards cleared his throat. Not aggressive, but present. A reminder that I could be escorted if I didn't move fast enough. That's what the 30 minutes was for. A way to make me small in front of witnesses. "Okay," I said. And then, because something inside me refused to give them the reaction they were expecting, I added, "Thank you." Brooke's ankle stopped bouncing. Richard's eyebrows twitched upward like I'd spoken the wrong language. I pushed my chair back, slow enough to keep it from scraping. The sound of the legs against the carpet would have been too loud, too dramatic. I stood, picked up my laptop with both hands, and closed it. The click of the lid was clean and final. As I walked out, the glass walls reflected me from 3 angles. Navy blazer, black slacks, hair twisted into a clip that was starting to loosen, a smear of ink on the side of my index finger from printing. I looked like someone heading to a meeting, not someone being erased. My office was 27 steps from the conference room. I counted them without meaning to. The hallway lights hummed. Someone had set a bowl of peppermints on the credenza outside the executive suite, the red and white wrappers bright against the beige wood. I took one and put it in my pocket. I don't even like peppermint. My hand did it anyway, like a test to see if I still had choices. Inside my office, the air was warmer. Stale from the space heater I ran under my desk because maintenance never fixed the draft. My coat was on the back of the chair. A half-empty bottle of water sat beside my keyboard. My notebook was open to a page of bullet points for today's meeting. The ink was neat, like I'd believed neatness could keep chaos out. On the corner of my desk was a framed photo of Ethan and me at Navy Pier, taken the first summer we were married. In the photo, he had his arm around my shoulders, smiling like nothing could touch us. I stared at that smile for a half-second too long. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The frame had been moved. Not much, maybe an inch. But I knew where it always sat because I lined it up with the edge of the desk blotter every morning without thinking. Someone had been in here. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out the cardboard box I kept folded flat for moves that never happened. I popped it into shape with sharp creases, set it on the floor, and started packing the way you pack when you're trying not to feel. Laptop charger. Notebook. The binder labeled West Halstead HUD. My own pen cup. The cheap stress ball shaped like a brick that my team gave me as a joke. Outside my office, the floor had gone quiet. No keyboard clicking, no phones, no laughter from the break room. Just that tight office silence where everyone is pretending they aren't listening. At 9:22, my badge lanyard buzzed once, a final little shiver like a dying thing. At 9:24, I picked up the framed photo, wiped the glass with my sleeve, and slid it into the box. At 9:25, I saw movement through the glass wall that faced the open office. A man stood up from his desk and picked up his coat without looking around for permission. Marcus Lee, senior project manager, the one who used to bring his daughter's science fair posters into the office to show me, because he knew I liked the messy optimism of them. He didn't hesitate. He didn't shrug. He just lifted his laptop bag like he'd been ready for this. Then, 3 desks down, Tasha Nguyen stood too, pulling a tote bag from under her chair. And in the conference room behind the glass, I watched Richard Davenport turn his head, following my gaze, and for the first time that morning, his face lost its certainty, like he'd just realized the 30 minutes he gave me had given something else time to start moving. By the time I lifted the box and stepped into the hallway, Marcus was already waiting for the elevator. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, the kind of nod that isn't polite, but permanent. Tasha stood beside him, phone in her hand, screen lit with a message she hadn't sent yet. Her jaw was set so tight I could see the muscle jump. Behind us, chairs scraped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be heard. I walked past the conference room. Through the glass, Richard Davenport had risen from his seat. Brooke was standing now too, her mug abandoned on the table, a faint ring of coffee already drying into the wood. The HR director's hands were pressed flat against the table like she needed to anchor herself. No one spoke. Not yet. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Marcus stepped in first, then Tasha, then me. The box was heavier than it should have been, like gravity had decided to make a point. As the doors began to close, another person slipped in Ellen from compliance, breathless, her scarf half on, half off. She smiled at me, quick and nervous. "I'll explain later," she said, to no one in particular. The doors shut. No one touched the buttons. Marcus finally leaned forward and pressed L. The elevator started its slow descent. 21 floors. It always took longer going down, like the building wanted you to reconsider. At the 15th floor, the doors opened again. 2 more people stepped in, then 1 more on 12. By the time we passed 10, the car felt crowded in a way it never did at rush hour. Laptops hugged to chests, coats draped over arms, eyes fixed anywhere but the mirrored walls. At 7, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it this time. "Ethan." "What's going on?" "Dad says there's a misunderstanding." I didn't respond. At 3, the elevator jerked slightly and then continued. Slower now. The silence had weight. You could feel it pressing in from all sides. When the doors opened in the lobby, the receptionist stood up so fast, her chair rolled backward into the wall. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the box in my arms, at the line of people behind me, and her eyes filled with something like panic. She started. "It's okay," I said, and meant something I didn't have words for yet. We walked out together. Past the marble wall with the Davenport Communities logo etched into it. Past the framed photos of ribbon cuttings and smiling families and men in suits holding oversized checks. Past the security desk where the guard on duty, Dave, who always complained about his knees, took his hand off the scanner and just watched us go. Outside, the air was sharper than I expected. Cold enough to wake you up. The river wind cut straight through my blazer. Someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, then clapped a hand over their mouth like they'd made a mistake. Cars honked. A bus hissed to a stop. The city didn't care. It kept moving the way it always did. We stood there on the sidewalk, an uneven cluster of people who hadn't planned this, didn't know what came next. For a second, no one spoke. Then Marcus exhaled hard. "Well," he said, "that just happened." Tasha nodded. "Yeah, it did." My phone buzzed again. This time, it rang. "Ethan." I stepped a few feet away, still holding the box, and answered. "Maya," he said, too fast. "What did you do?" I looked back at the building. 21 floors of glass and steel, reflecting the river like it had nothing to hide. "I went to work," I said. "I was fired." "That's not what Dad said." "Of course it isn't." He paused. I could picture him in his home office, the one with the adjustable desk his parents bought him as a housewarming gift. He always stood when he talked to his father. "Always. He said you were being uncooperative," Ethan said. "That you were slowing things down. That there were compliance issues." "There aren't," I said. "There were safeguards. He removed me from them." Another pause? Longer this time. "Brooke's taking over West Halstead," he said finally. "Just temporarily, until things stabilize." My fingers tightened around the edge of the box. Cardboard bent slightly under the pressure. "West Halstead isn't a thing," I said. "It's a federally monitored trust. Brooke doesn't have clearance. She doesn't have training. She doesn't even have the passwords. She'll figure it out," he said, and I could hear him choosing comfort over truth in real time. "Dad says you're overreacting." I closed my eyes. "Just for a second. Tell your father," I said, "that everything I built there is documented. Every process, every exception, every warning. Maya, and tell him," I continued, "that I didn't take anything with me except what already belonged to me." I hung up before he could say my name again. Behind me, people were checking their phones now. Messages stacking up. Slack channels exploding. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else laughed again, louder this time, the sound edged with disbelief. Marcus came up beside me. "You okay?" I nodded. It was easier than explaining. We didn't stay long. One by one, people peeled off, heading toward parked cars, bus stops, trains. Promises were made in low voices. "Text me. Call me tonight. We'll talk." By the time I reached my car, the box had started to dig into my arms. I set it down in the passenger seat and just sat there for a minute. Hands on the steering wheel, engine off. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Ethan. "Unknown number." I answered. "Please don't hang up," a woman whispered. The sound of running water echoed faintly. "This is Linda Carver." "Legal." I straightened. Linda was Davenport's senior counsel. She'd been with the company longer than I'd known Ethan. "I'm listening," I said. "He's made a mistake," she said. "A big one, and he doesn't know it yet." I didn't say anything. "The way he terminated you?" Linda continued. The timing, the witnesses, the fact that West Halstead is under active federal review. There are clauses in your contract he's never read. Penalty clauses. My heart started to beat faster, but my voice stayed even. Why are you telling me this? Because when the auditors ask who removed the safeguards, she said, I won't lie, and because when he realizes what he's done, he's going to try to make you disappear quietly. The water shut off. Her breathing sounded tight. Document everything, she said. Every call, every message. Don't sign anything. Are you calling from the office? I asked. No, she said quickly. I'm in the restroom on 16. The one no one uses. I pictured it instantly. The cracked mirror, the flickering light, the smell of industrial soap. Thank you, I said. The call ended. I started the car. The drive home took 17 minutes. I know because I counted the red lights, 7 of them. At the last one, my phone buzzed again. Ethan, Dad wants to talk tonight. He says this can still be fixed. I pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. Our house looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Same porch light, same potted plant I kept forgetting to water, same quiet street, fixed. I picked up the box and went inside. Ethan was waiting by the kitchen counter, phone in his hand. He looked relieved when he saw me, like he'd expected me to come back smaller. Thank God, he said. I was worried you'd... He stopped when he saw the box. They really walked you out? No, I said. They counted me down. He winced. Dad didn't mean it like that. I set the box on the table. The cheap wood creaked under the weight. He wants you to help smooth this over, Ethan said, just until things settle. Sign an NDA. Let Brooke stabilize the trust. You can consult quietly. No press, no regulators getting jumpy. I looked at him. Really looked. The man I married. The man who still thought this was a misunderstanding. You're asking me to fix what he broke, I said. I'm asking you to protect the family, he said. Something cold settled in my chest. I already did, I said. For 3 years. And today, he told me what that was worth. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. He says you have leverage, Ethan said carefully. He wants to know what you took. I smiled. Not because it was funny. I didn't take anything, I said. I just stopped holding everything together. Upstairs, my phone buzzed again. Then again. Messages piling up. Names I recognized. Numbers I didn't. Somewhere downtown, in a glass building by the river, a man named Richard Davenport was learning what happens when you remove the foundation and expect the structure to stay standing. And for the first time since 9/12 that morning, I felt absolutely certain that nothing was going to go the way he planned. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling above our bed, the one Ethan always said he'd fix when he had time. My phone rested on the nightstand, face up now, lighting the room every few minutes with another message. I stopped reading them after midnight. The pattern was clear enough without the words. Questions, confusion, fear. At 2:14 a.m., an email came through from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Automated, polite, cold. Subject, notice of compliance. Review West Halstead Housing Trust. I didn't open it right away. I knew what it would say. The review had been scheduled for next month. Routine on paper, brutal in practice. I had prepared for it for 6 months. Built redundancies. Cross-checked every reporting line. Flagged vulnerabilities in memos that now sat unanswered in Richard's inbox. I rolled onto my side and watched Ethan sleep. His back was turned to me. He'd fallen asleep sometime after midnight, phone still in his hand. The screen lit up once, then went dark again. At 6:03 a.m., I got out of bed, showered, and dressed like I was going to work. Muscle memory, black jeans, gray sweater, boots with the scuffed left heel. I made coffee and didn't drink it. At 6:41, my phone rang. Linda again. They're in panic mode, she said without greeting. Richard's been calling board members since 5. He thinks this is about PR. I leaned against the counter, staring at the sink. It's not. No, she said. It's about process. And process is the one thing he's always ignored. I closed my eyes. What's happening at West Halstead? Silence. Too long. They locked themselves out of the compliance portal, Linda said. Brooke tried to reset permissions. She triggered an audit log. I pictured Brooke at her desk, clicking through screens she didn't understand, confident the system would bend for her like everything else always had. That portal tracks every access change, I said. Every download. Every override. I know, Linda said quietly. Did she call anyone? I asked. She called IT. IT told her they couldn't help without your authorization. She escalated to Richard. And? And he told them to bypass protocol. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Linda, I said, you need to put everything in writing, now. I already am, she said. And Maya, when this breaks, he's going to say you were responsible. He's going to say you set it up to fail. I didn't, I said. I know, she said. But he won't. The call ended. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. At 8:17 Ethan came downstairs, already in his work clothes. He looked tired, older, like someone had taken something from him while he slept. Dad wants to meet, he said. Today. I didn't turn around. Where? The club. I laughed. It came out sharp and wrong. Of course he does. He says this has gotten out of hand, Ethan said. That regulators are asking questions. That Brooke's overwhelmed. I faced him then. She was never supposed to be there. She was supposed to transition, he said weakly. There is no transition, I said. There are rules. And he broke them. Ethan rubbed his face. He thinks you did this on purpose. Did what? Left. Took your team. Let everything fall apart. I felt something settle in me then. Not anger. Not sadness. Something firmer. I didn't let anything fall apart, I said. I just stopped catching it. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, then didn't. His phone buzzed. He checked it, then swallowed. He wants you to sign something, Ethan said, a statement. Saying the compliance failures were already in motion before you were terminated? I shook my head. No. Maya? No, I repeated. I won't lie so he can sleep at night. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. If you don't help him, he said, this could ruin him. I thought of the conference room, the watch, the security guards. He ruined himself, I said. He left without another word. By noon, the news started to leak, not to the press, not yet, but through the quieter channels. Emails between consultants, phone calls between city offices. A compliance review had turned into a formal investigation. At 1:38 p.m., HUD requested archived communications related to West Halstead's governance structure. At 2:05, a city council aide called my personal number. At 3:11, my former Slack channel, now renamed something like After, lit up with screenshots from inside Davenport communities. Brooke crying in the restroom. Richard yelling at IT. A board member walking out of a meeting. At 4:22, Linda sent me a single sentence. He just realized you designed the fail-safes to require your sign-off. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. Not in shock, in recognition. I had built those safeguards because federal money demanded it. Because vulnerable families deserved it. Because I didn't trust power without accountability. Richard had signed off on them without reading. He always did. At 5:07, Ethan came home again. His tie was gone. His face was flushed. He wants to offer you a settlement, he said. Severance. Consulting fees. Whatever you want. What does he want in return? I asked. Your silence, Ethan said. And your signature. I stood up. No. He's scared, Ethan said. I've never seen him like this. I walked past him to the stairs. Neither have I. That night, after Ethan fell asleep on the couch, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Maya Torres? A man asked. Yes. This is Samuel Green. Office of the Inspector General. I closed my eyes. We'd like to speak with you, he said. About West Halstead. About your termination. And about certain documents we believe you can authenticate. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, he said. 9 a.m. I hung up and sat there in the dark, the house quiet around me. Somewhere in the city, files were being opened. Logs were being read. Decisions were being revisited. Richard Davenport had spent his life believing control was permanent. That loyalty could be enforced. That people would always clean up after him. He had never considered what would happen if the person holding everything together simply stepped aside and told the truth. At 11:46 p.m., I opened my laptop for the first time since I packed it into that box. I logged into my personal drive and pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in months. West Halstead Internal. Inside were memos, timelines, warnings, emails marked follow-up required. I didn't add anything. I didn't edit anything. I just made sure every file was exactly where it had always been, and then I waited. The federal building was colder than it needed to be. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of cold that comes from fluorescent lights and beige walls and people who have learned how to listen without reacting. I arrived 15 minutes early, sat in a molded plastic chair, and watched the second hand on the wall clock jerk its way around the circle. At exactly 9 a.m., a door opened and a woman in a navy blazer called my name. The interview room was small. A table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs. A legal pad placed precisely in the center, untouched. Samuel Green sat on one side, sleeves rolled up, glasses resting low on his nose. Another woman sat beside him, typing already, her fingers moving without hesitation. "Thank you for coming," Samuel said. "I was invited," I said. That earned me a brief nod. They didn't start with West Halstead. They started with my background. Education, employment history, how I'd come to work at Davenport Communities, how long I'd been in my role. Neutral questions, establishing the shape of my credibility. Then Samuel folded his hands and leaned back. "Walk us through the safeguards you put in place for West Halstead," he said. I did. I talked about federal compliance requirements, about separation of authority, about why no single executive should ever have unilateral access to a trust built on public funds. I explained the audit logs, the access controls, the mandatory approvals. The woman beside him typed steadily. No reactions, no interruptions. "When did you first raise concerns?" Samuel asked. I slid a printed timeline across the table. Dates, emails, memos, subject lines. He read them slowly. "And when were you removed from oversight?" he asked. "Tuesday. 9:12 a.m. He wrote that down. "Who removed you?" "My father-in-law," I said. "Richard Davenport." No reaction, just another note. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it ended, Samuel stood and shook my hand. "You did the right thing coming in," he said. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I answered your questions." He met my eyes. Sometimes that's enough. By the time I got back to my car, my phone had 12 missed calls. Ethan, Linda, 2 unknown numbers. I sat behind the wheel and didn't turn the key. The first voicemail was Ethan. "Maya, please call me. Dad's in a meeting with the board. Things are bad. He says this is spiraling." The second was Linda. "They've frozen discretionary spending," she said, voice low. "The board's involved now. They're asking questions he can't answer." The third was from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Denise Alvarez from Channel 7. We'd like to comment on your departure from Davenport Communities." I deleted that one. At home, Ethan was pacing the living room when I walked in. He stopped when he saw me, relief flickering across his face before something harder replaced it. "They interviewed you?" he said. "Yes." "What?" "You told them everything." I told the truth. He ran a hand through his hair. "Dad says this is a witch hunt, that you're cooperating because you're bitter." I set my bag down. "Did he say why he fired me?" Ethan hesitated. "He said you were a liability." I nodded. I was. "How?" "Because I wouldn't break the law." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His phone buzzed. He checked it, then exhaled sharply. "They're calling an emergency board meeting tonight," he said. "He wants you there." I shook my head. "No, Maya. I won't sit in a room where he pretends this is about strategy," I said. "It's about consequences." "He's offering a formal apology," Ethan said, "and a revised severance package, full benefits, a public statement correcting the record." "And in exchange?" I asked. "An NDA," he said, "and a non-compete." I laughed softly. He still thinks this is a negotiation. Ethan's shoulders sagged. "If you don't help him," he said, "they could remove him." "They should," I said. He looked at me like I'd struck him. "That company is his life," Ethan said. "So is my job," I said. "So were the people living at West Halstead." Silence stretched between us. That night, Ethan slept in the guest room. The next morning, the story broke anyway. Not with my name, with West Halstead's. A headline about irregularities in governance of public housing trust. Another about founder under scrutiny. The language was careful. No accusations yet. Just questions. By noon, Richard's name was everywhere. By 3 p.m., his voicemail box was full. Linda called again. "The board wants him to step aside temporarily." "For how long?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. They didn't say. At 6:18 p.m., Ethan came home early. He looked hollow. "He's being pushed out," he said. "They're calling it a leave of absence." I poured 2 glasses of water and handed him one. He took it without looking at me. "They asked me to talk to you," he said. "They think you're the only one who can stabilize this." I sat across from him. "I already did stabilize it. For years." He swallowed. "He says he made a mistake." I waited. "He says he shouldn't have humiliated you," Ethan continued. "That he acted out of frustration. That Brooke wasn't ready." "And?" I asked. And he wants to meet, Ethan said. Just the three of us? I pictured the conference room again. The watch. The guards. No, I said. Ethan's face tightened. You won't even hear him out? I heard him, I said. He gave me 30 minutes. The next day, Linda sent me a copy of the board's decision. Richard Davenport was stepping down as chairman, effective immediately. An interim executive committee would assume control. The language was clean. Bloodless. Ethan read it twice, then set the paper down like it might burn him. He didn't even call, he said quietly. He doesn't apologize, I said. He replaces. That evening, Ethan packed a bag. I need time, he said. I nodded. So do I. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, like he wanted to say something else. Then he left. 3 days later, I received a formal request from the Inspector General's office to provide additional documentation. I sent them everything they asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. A week later, Linda resigned. Her farewell email was brief, professional. She copied the board. 2 weeks after that, Brooke Halstead's name disappeared from the company website. A month later, Richard Davenport's resignation became permanent. The press called it a retirement. I called it overdue. One afternoon, as I was sorting through mail, I found an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I recognized instantly. Sharp. Confident. Pressed hard enough to leave an impression. Inside was a single check and a typed note. Maya, this was never supposed to happen like this. RD. I didn't cash the check. I tore it in half and threw it away. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. The quiet didn't last. It never does. A week after Richard's resignation became public, my phone started ringing again. Not with panic this time. With opportunity. Consultants I hadn't spoken to in years. City offices suddenly eager to revisit conversations. Nonprofits asking if I was available even briefly. Everyone had watched the same thing happen. A system fail when the person who actually understood it was pushed out. I didn't answer most of them. I needed space before I decided who I was, without Davenport communities stitched into my days. On a gray Thursday morning, I drove to West Halstead for the first time since my firing. The building looked the same from the outside. Red brick softened by years of weather. The mural on the side wall, painted by local kids, still showed a row of hands reaching upward, fingers overlapping. I'd fought for that mural. Richard had called it visual clutter. I'd told him it made people slow down. He'd rolled his eyes and signed the permit anyway. Inside, the lobby smelled like fresh paint and old radiator heat. Mrs. Alvarez from Unit 3B sat behind the folding table near the entrance, sorting mail. When she saw me, she stood up so fast the chair tipped. Maya, she said, hand flying to her chest. You're back? Just visiting, I said. She reached out and took my hand without asking. Her palm was warm and dry. They told us you left, she said, but they didn't say why. Things have been strange. How? I asked. She glanced toward the office door. They keep changing people. And last week, the water was shut off for half a day. No warning. My jaw tightened. That shouldn't have happened. She nodded. I told them you would never let that happen. I didn't trust myself to answer. In the office, boxes were stacked along the walls, files half-labeled. A young man sat behind the desk I used to occupy, flipping through a binder with the lost look of someone dropped into deep water. He stood when he saw me. Hi, can I help you? I'm just checking in, I said. He hesitated. Are you... Maya? I nodded. He exhaled. Thank God. Sorry. I've been trying to understand the reporting structure, but the documents keep contradicting each other. They don't, I said. They just require context. He laughed. A short, nervous sound. That's what everyone keeps saying. I walked him through the basics. Not everything. Just enough to stop the bleeding. He took notes furiously, like a student trying to keep up. When I left, Mrs. Alvarez pressed a paper bag into my hands. Inside was a container of arroz con pollo, still warm. For later, she said. You look thin. I drove home with the smell filling the car, something loosening in my chest. That night, I ate alone at the kitchen table. The house felt bigger without Ethan. Quieter. Less compromised. I realized I liked it that way. The next call came from the city. They wanted to know if I would consider consulting on West Halstead officially this time. Short term. Transparent. Paid. I thought about Richard's note. About the check I'd torn up. About the board members who hadn't spoken up until it was safe. No, I said. But I'll help you find someone who can. They pushed. I declined again. 2 days later, another call came, different number, same building. This one was from the interim chair of Davenport Communities. "We'd like to invite you to rejoin," she said. "In a restructured role." "No," I said. "With expanded authority," she added. "And public acknowledgement of your work." "No," I repeated. There was a pause. "May I ask why?" I looked out the window at the street. A delivery truck idled. A kid rode past on a bike, backpack bouncing. "Because I don't want to spend my life fixing systems built to protect people who don't change," I said. After I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. That afternoon, Marcus came over with coffee and a legal pad. "We've been talking," he said, settling into a chair like he belonged there. "Me, Tasha, Ellen, a few others." "About what?" I asked. "About not going back," he said. "About building something that doesn't fall apart when one ego throws a tantrum." I raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan?" He slid the legal pad across the table. "Names, skills, ideas scribbled in the margins." "Not a company," he said quickly. "Not yet. More like a cooperative. Advisory work, governance audits, temporary intervention teams, the stuff no one wants to pay for until it's too late." I scanned the page. It was rough. Incomplete. "It was real. You'd need someone to run it," I said. Marcus smiled. "We were hoping you'd say that." I didn't answer right away. That night, Ethan called. "I heard you went to West Halsted," he said. "Yes. They're saying you helped straighten things out." "For an hour," I said. He hesitated. "Dad heard." I waited. "He says you're still trying to hurt him." I laughed, tired. "I didn't think about him at all." Silence stretched across the line. "I don't know who he is without the company," Ethan said finally. "He sits at home and watches the news. He rewinds segments about himself. That's not my responsibility," I said gently. "I know," he said. His voice broke, just slightly. "I didn't know it would end like this." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. We talked for another 10 minutes. About nothing important. About the weather. About the dog he'd seen on his walk. When we hung up, I felt sad for him. And relieved for myself. The cooperative took shape slowly. A borrowed office. Folding tables. A donated printer that jammed constantly. It felt familiar in the best way. Our first call came from a small city 2 states away. A housing trust on the brink. Board infighting. Missing documentation. Tenants caught in the middle. We said yes. Words spread quietly, not through press releases, through people who'd watched Davenport Communities unravel and understood why. One evening, as I locked up the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Saw the announcement. Proud of you." I smiled. Months later, I ran into Richard Davenport by accident. I was leaving a coffee shop downtown when I saw him sitting alone at a corner table. No entourage. No phone calls. Just a paper cup and a newspaper folded to the business section. He looked smaller, not older. Smaller. He looked up as I passed. Recognition flickered. Then, something like regret. "Maya," he said. "Richard," I said. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then nodded once. Stiffly. I kept walking. I didn't feel anger. Or triumph. I felt distance. And distance, I'd learned, was the one thing he could never buy back. The cooperative didn't announce itself. It didn't have a logo or a press kit or a launch party with warm white lights and speeches about disruption. It had a rented suite above a tax office, a coffee maker that leaked, and a whiteboard that still smelled faintly of cleaner. We called it Groundwork. Marcus said the name sounded boring enough to be safe. Tasha said it sounded honest. I didn't care what it sounded like as long as it worked. Our first real contract started on a Monday. A housing authority in a mid-sized city on the edge of the Great Lakes. Their executive director had been fired quietly after an internal review. Nobody knew where the money went. Everybody knew who got blamed. We drove out together in 2 cars. 4 hours on the highway, gray sky, radio off. At a gas station halfway there, Ellen bought granola bars and lined them up on the counter like supplies before a storm. At the site, the problems were obvious. Incomplete files. Passwords written on sticky notes. Board members who couldn't explain what they'd approved or why. Tenants who'd stopped believing anyone was listening. It was familiar in a way that made my shoulders loosen instead of tighten. I didn't take charge. I didn't have to. Everyone knew what they were there to do. Marcus untangled contracts. Tasha rebuilt reporting workflows. Ellen talked to the city. I sat with the documents and read. On the 3rd day, the interim director pulled me aside. "We didn't know it could be this bad without anyone noticing," she said. I nodded. "That's how it usually is." At night, back at the hotel, My phone stayed quiet. No Davenport alerts. No urgent calls from Ethan. The silence felt earned. On Thursday evening, as we were packing up to leave, a reporter called Marcus. "Just a few questions," she said. "About your firm." "We're not a firm," he said, glancing at me. "About your group," she corrected. "No comment," he said, and hung up. On the drive home, the sky cleared. The lake flashed silver beside the road. "We should probably prepare for attention," Tasha said. "Maybe," I said. "But we don't chase it." She smiled. "Good." 2 weeks later, groundwork was booked solid for 3 months. Not with big names. With places on the brink, school districts, small nonprofits, housing trusts, that had been streamlined until nothing held. The work was hard and unglamorous. It required listening more than talking, reading more than presenting, fixing problems that didn't have a single villain, just years of neglect and fear. I slept better than I had in years. Ethan and I spoke occasionally. Carefully, like people learning a new language. He'd moved into a short-term rental downtown. He said it felt strange not to have his father's name open doors for him anymore. "They don't call me back," he said once. "Not like they used to." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it in the way you mean sympathy, not regret. One night, after a long day, I found an envelope taped to my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a printed article, a business profile. The headline read, "Former Titan fades from view." Richard's photo was small, older than I remembered. The article talked about changing times and leadership transitions. It mentioned Davenport communities had been sold off in pieces. The housing arm spun out. The real estate portfolio absorbed by a larger firm. Richard's role reduced to advisor emeritus. At the bottom, in pen, someone had written, "You won." I stared at it for a long moment, then folded the paper and put it in the recycling. Winning had never been the point. A month later, Linda showed up at our office. She stood in the doorway, taking in the folding tables, the mismatched chairs, the stacks of files. "This is it?" she asked. "This is it," Marcus said. She laughed, then grew serious. "I'm not here to audit you," she said. "I'm here because I need a job." We hired her that afternoon. With Linda on board, we started getting requests we hadn't expected. Universities, hospitals, even a private foundation that had quietly paid out settlements for years without fixing the cause. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a set of bylaws, Linda leaned into my office. "You know he's been asking about you," she said. I didn't look up. "Who?" "Richard," she said. "He asked if you'd speak with him." Privately, I closed the folder. "No, he says he wants to apologize," she added. "I've heard that before," I said. Linda nodded. I figured. That night, Ethan called. "He's not doing well," he said. I sat on the edge of my bed. What does that mean? "He's angry," Ethan said. "At everyone. At the board. At the press. At me." I was quiet. "He still thinks you betrayed him," Ethan said. "That you waited for the right moment." "I didn't wait," I said. "I was pushed." "I know," Ethan said. I wish it had been different." "So do I," said. "But I didn't." "Not really." The real change came quietly. One morning, Mrs. Alvarez from West Halstead called me. "They fixed the boiler," she said. "And the new director came by." She asked us questions. "That's good," I said. "She said your name," Mrs. Alvarez added. "She said, 'We're going to do this the way Maya built it.'" I closed my eyes. "That means more than you think," Mrs. Alvarez said. After the call, I sat at my desk and stared at the whiteboard, at the mess of arrows and notes and half-erased plans. I thought about the conference room, the watch, the 30 minutes, about how easily power mistakes obedience for loyalty, how quickly it panics when that illusion breaks. Groundwork grew, slowly, on purpose. We turned down more work than we took. We wrote our rules down and followed them. We built redundancy into everything. We refused contracts that required silence. One evening, months later, as we were locking up, Marcus asked me a question he'd been circling for a while. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The scale, the resources." I thought about the marble lobby, the etched name, the empty authority. "No," I said. "I miss the people, not the pedestal." He nodded. That winter, a storm knocked out power across half the city. Our office lost electricity. We worked by flashlight, laptops tethered to phones, finishing a report that had to be submitted by midnight. When we finally sent it, Tasha leaned back and laughed. "Remember when one man thought he could hold all of this in his head?" she said. I smiled. "He never could," I said. He just thought everyone else was replaceable. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, covering everything evenly. And for the first time since that Tuesday morning, I realized something else. The collapse had already happened. This work, this calm, this distance from fear was what came after. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon, almost a year to the day after Richard Davenport gave me 30 minutes. It wasn't urgent sounding, no panic, no raised voice. It was Linda. "There's a hearing," she said. "Closed session. State level." I swiveled my chair slowly. Outside my office window, traffic crawled past in patient lines. A food truck idled on the corner, generator humming. "For what?" I asked. "For fiduciary breach," she said. "And misuse of public funds." I didn't respond right away. "They're not naming him publicly yet," Linda added. "But they will. They're building the record first." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "Do they need anything from me?" "Yes," she said, "but not testimony. Context." That was new. The hearing was held in a government annex downtown. No press, no cameras, just a long table, bad coffee, and people who had read every document twice. Richard Davenport sat at the far end, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched. He wore a suit that was a little too loose now. He didn't look at me when I took my seat. Across from us sat 3 commissioners, folders open, pens ready. The chairwoman spoke first. "We're not here to relitigate your termination," she said, nodding toward me briefly. "We're here to understand how governance failed." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Davenport, can you explain why compliance authority was reassigned without board approval?" Richard cleared his throat. "Operational necessity." "And the safeguards?" she asked. "They were excessive," he said. "They slowed progress." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. The chairwoman looked down at her notes. "Miss Torres designed those safeguards, correct?" "Yes," Richard said tightly. "And you approved them?" "Yes." "And you removed her?" "Yes." She nodded once, like she'd reached the end of a long equation. "Miss Torres," she said. "When those safeguards were removed, what happened?" I spoke plainly. About audit flags, about access logs, about systems designed to fail loudly when misused. Richard shifted in his chair. "So you're saying," the chairwoman said, "that the collapse we're seeing now was not accidental. It was preventable," I said. That was all. The hearing ended quietly. No verdict. No dramatic statements. Richard stood as soon as it was adjourned. He paused beside me, finally meeting my eyes. "You didn't have to be there," he said. "I was asked," I replied. His mouth tightened. "You enjoyed this?" I looked at him. Really looked. The man who had always mistaken fear for respect. "No," I said. "I endured it." He flinched. Just slightly. Outside, the air was sharp. I walked away without looking back. 2 weeks later, the findings were released. They didn't use words like villain or abuse. They used phrases like systemic failure and concentration of authority. They named Richard Davenport. The fallout was swift and quiet. No arrest, no courtroom drama, just consequences layered on consequences. He was barred from serving on boards connected to public funds. His remaining advisory roles dissolved. The foundations bearing his name quietly rebranded. Ethan called that night. "He says you destroyed him," Ethan said. I closed my eyes. "I didn't destroy anything." "He's alone," Ethan said. "He doesn't understand why no one's calling. That's what happens when people only show up because they're paid to," I said gently. Ethan was silent for a long moment. "I'm not calling to ask you to fix it," he said finally. "I know better now." "That's good," I said. There was a pause. "I'm proud of you," he said, quietly. The words landed differently than I expected. Not like closure. Like confirmation. Groundwork kept growing. But the work changed. Less emergency. More rebuilding. We trained boards. We wrote plain language governance manuals. We taught people how to ask the right questions before things broke. One afternoon, a young woman stopped me after a workshop. "I watched what happened to you," she said. "It made me quit a job I hated." I smiled. "I'm sorry." She laughed. "Don't be. I didn't realize how heavy it was until I put it down." That night, I walked home instead of taking the train. The city felt different now. Not smaller, just clearer. I passed a building with marble steps and a brass plaque. A name had been removed, the outline still visible if you looked closely. I stopped for a moment, then kept walking. Months later, I ran into Richard again. This time, it was in a grocery store. He was standing in front of the canned goods, staring at labels like they might explain something. He saw me and froze. "Maya," he said. I nodded. I never thought it would end like this, he said. I believed him. He opened his mouth, searching for something to say. An apology. A defense. I didn't wait. It ended exactly how it was built, I said. Top-heavy. Brittle. He looked down at his hands. I gave you everything. I shook my head. You gave me 30 minutes. I walked away before he could respond. That night, back at the office, we finished a report just before midnight. Marcus stretched and shut his laptop. Another one saved, he said. I smiled, tired and satisfied. As I turned off the lights, I thought about the strange calm that follows collapse, the space it leaves, the chance to build something that doesn't depend on fear. Richard Davenport believed everything he touched would last forever. What he never understood was this. Systems don't fall because people leave. They fall because the wrong people stay in charge too long. The aftermath settled in layers. Not all at once. Not with a bang. More like dust after a demolition. Fine, persistent, getting into places you didn't realize were exposed. Groundwork started receiving requests from places that used to intimidate me. State agencies, university boards, a hospital network that had quietly paid out settlements for years instead of fixing the structure that caused them. They didn't ask for miracles. They asked for clarity. For systems that didn't depend on one person's mood. We charged fairly. We worked slowly. We wrote everything down. I moved out of the house Ethan and I had bought together and into a small apartment near the river. It had creaky floors and a kitchen window that faced another brick wall, close enough that I could see into the neighbor's living room if I wanted to. I didn't. I liked the anonymity. I liked knowing no one had keys but me. Ethan and I met for coffee once a month. Sometimes less. Sometimes not at all. We talked about logistics, about his new job, about the weather. We didn't talk about his father unless it was unavoidable. One afternoon, he surprised me. I'm seeing someone, he said, stirring his coffee too much. She doesn't know everything. That's probably for the best, I said. She asked about you, he added. I told her you were the bravest person I know. I looked at him. He meant it. That mattered more than I expected. Groundwork's work shifted again when Linda brought in a new kind of case. Not public housing, not nonprofits. A family-owned manufacturing company in Indiana, 3 generations. Patriarch in his 70s, founder, untouchable. The board's terrified, Linda said. But they know something's wrong. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, recognition. We took the contract. The parallels were uncomfortable. A founder who confused loyalty with silence. A family that benefited from the structure but didn't understand it. Employees who'd learned how to keep their heads down. This time I stayed in the background. Marcus led the meetings. Tasha ran the analysis. I watched. At the end of the week, the founder pulled me aside. You remind me of someone, he said. I didn't ask who. He squinted at me. You don't flatter. You don't threaten. You just tell people what's broken. I nodded. He sighed. That's dangerous. It doesn't have to be, I said. He laughed softly. It always is. The board voted him out 2 months later. With severance, with dignity, with a plan. He never spoke to me again. One night, as I was locking up the office, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. Richard. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded thinner, strained. I don't expect you to call back, he said. I wanted to tell you something. I didn't delete it. I didn't listen to it again. I let it sit there like an unopened letter. Weeks later, Linda told me he'd sold the house. The big one. The one with the stone columns and the iron gate. He's moving to Arizona, she said. Smaller place. Gated community. I nodded. He always liked control. She smiled faintly. Not as much as he liked the illusion of it. Groundwork hired 3 more people that year. Carefully. We turned down anyone who talked too much about fixing things fast. We didn't fix. We rebuilt. One evening, Mrs. Alvarez sent me a photo. West Halstead's lobby, freshly painted. Kids' artwork on the walls. A notice board announcing a resident council meeting. Her message read, "It feels like ours again." I stared at the photo longer than I meant to. That was the thing no one talked about when they talked about revenge. How empty it feels when it's over. How the satisfaction doesn't come from watching someone fall, but from seeing what survives. The final twist came quietly. It arrived in an email from a junior analyst at a firm I didn't recognize. Subject line. Question regarding prior governance model. Inside was a simple request. They were auditing a foundation that had once partnered with Davenport communities. The records showed a pattern. Decisions routed through Richard even when policy forbade it. Signatures where there shouldn't have been signatures. They wanted to know if I could confirm whether this was standard practice. I forwarded the email to Linda. She called me 10 minutes later. "This isn't about West Halstead anymore," she said. "No," I agreed. "It's about the pattern," she said. "And the pattern goes back decades." I didn't feel excitement or dread. I felt finished. Months later, an article ran in a trade publication. No headlines, no scandal language, just an analysis of legacy governance risks. Richard's name appeared once, in the middle, as an example. That night, I finally listened to the voicemail. "I thought fear made people loyal," Richard said. "I thought if I kept everything tight enough, nothing could slip away." I was wrong. There was a pause. Static. "I don't know who I am without it," he said. The message ended. I didn't call back. I stood by the window and watched the river move, steady and indifferent. The collapse he feared hadn't been sudden. It had been slow, built into every choice he made. What he never understood was this: power doesn't vanish when it's challenged. It vanishes when it's exposed to daylight and found hollow. And by the time he realized that, the structure he'd built his life around was already gone. By the time winter turned into something softer, I stopped thinking about Richard Davenport entirely. That surprised me more than anything else. I used to think people like him stayed with you forever, that once someone had shaped a large part of your life, they lingered in the background like noise you learned to ignore, but never escaped. Instead, he faded the way old habits do, first noticeable by their absence, then not noticeable at all. Groundwork moved into a better space. Still modest, but with real walls and windows that opened. We bought desks secondhand, from a startup that had burned bright and collapsed fast. The irony wasn't lost on us. On our first day there, Marcus taped a piece of paper above the whiteboard. It read, "No single point of failure." Tasha laughed. Ellen nodded. Linda took a photo. The work became less reactive and more intentional. We weren't just called when things were breaking anymore. People started calling before they did. A city council in Oregon asked us to review a redevelopment plan before it went public. A hospital network invited us in before renewing its executive contracts. A university asked us to sit in on board meetings, not to speak, just to observe. Watching without intervening turned out to be harder than fixing. I started teaching workshops twice a month. Governance for non-lawyers. Accountability without fear. The rooms were always full. People asked practical questions. They took notes. They stayed afterward to talk. One evening, after a session, a woman approached me. Early 30s. Sharp eyes. Nervous hands. "My boss reminds me of your father-in-law," she said quietly. I didn't correct her. "I keep thinking if I just work harder, he'll see me," she continued. I shook my head. "That's not how it works." She swallowed. "How do you leave?" "You don't leave all at once," I said. "You leave in pieces. First mentally, then on paper, then physically." She nodded like I'd given her a map. Ethan and I finalized the divorce that spring. No drama. No lawyers circling like vultures, just signatures and silence. We met once more afterward, sitting across from each other in a cafe we'd never gone to before. "I'm glad you didn't stay," he said. I looked at him. "Me too," he smiled, small and sad. "I think if you had, I would have disappeared completely." I didn't argue. Some truths don't need agreement. That summer, Groundwork was invited to present at a national conference. No keynote, just a panel on governance failures and recovery. I stood at the podium and looked out at the room. Hundreds of faces, some attentive, some skeptical, some afraid. I talked about systems, about incentives, about why the most dangerous organizations aren't corrupt, just unchallenged. I didn't mention Richard. I didn't mention Davenport Communities. I didn't need to. Afterward, a man in a tailored suit approached me. He introduced himself as a venture partner. "We invest in people who build scalable solutions," he said. "Have you considered expanding?" I shook my head. "Scale isn't the goal." He frowned. "It usually is." "That's the problem," I said. He laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. The real reckoning came from somewhere unexpected. One afternoon, a man showed up at the office unannounced. Late 60s, neatly dressed, nervous. He asked for me by name. "I'm Richard Davenport's brother," he said. I froze for half a second, then gestured for him to sit. He clasped his hands together, knuckles white. "I wanted to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For stopping him," he said. "I tried. Years ago. It didn't go well. I believed him. He fired me," the man continued, publicly, over a disagreement. The family pretended it never happened. I felt something shift. Not shock, Confirmation. He did the same thing to me, I said. The man nodded. I know. That's why I came. We sat in silence for a moment. He still talks about you, the man said. Says you took everything from him. I shook my head. I didn't take anything. The man smiled sadly. That's what scares him. After he left, I sat at my desk and stared at the wall. I thought about how many people had been pushed aside quietly, how many had swallowed it and moved on, how many never got the chance to be believed. That night, I went for a walk along the river. The water moved steadily, indifferent to everything we built beside it. I realized something then that felt like a final click. Richard Davenport's real punishment wasn't loss of status or money or reputation. It was irrelevance. No one needed him anymore. The systems he once controlled now functioned without him. The people he once intimidated had learned to speak without waiting for permission. He wasn't feared. He wasn't even hated. He was simply no longer part of the equation. And I understood, finally, why that mattered more than any courtroom victory. Revenge assumes the other person still has power over you. This wasn't revenge. This was release. I turned back toward home, the city lights reflecting off the water, and felt something settle fully into place. The part of my life shaped by his shadow was over. Everything after belonged entirely to me. The invitation arrived without ceremony. An email from a policy institute I'd never worked with before, asking if I would serve on a temporary advisory panel. 6 months. Unpaid. Quiet. The subject line didn't include Richard's name or Davenport communities or anything that hinted at the past. I almost declined. Then I read the details. The panel's task was to draft new state-level standards for governance in publicly funded housing and nonprofit trusts. Not recommendations. Requirements. Teeth included. I accepted. The meetings were held in a converted courthouse with bad acoustics and better coffee than you'd expect. 12 people sat around the table. Academics, former regulators, one retired judge, a woman who'd spent 30 years running shelters. No one knew my history unless they'd done their homework. No one treated me like a symbol. That was the appeal. We argued over language, over definitions, over how much discretion any one person should ever have. We talked about safeguards, not as obstacles, but as insurance. One afternoon, the judge leaned back and said, "Someone like Richard Davenport would hate this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The standards passed committee. Then subcommittee. Then quietly became policy. No headlines. No op-eds. Just rules. Around the same time, groundwork hit its first real limit. We were booked solid, turning away work we believed in because we couldn't do it well at scale. The temptation to grow faster pressed in from all sides. Marcus wanted to hire more people. Tasha wanted to develop training programs. Linda wanted to publish a white paper. I listened. I thought. I said no to half of it. This doesn't work if we become a machine, I said. We don't need to be everywhere, they argued. Reasonably. Passionately. In the end, we compromised. One more hire, one pilot training, no expansion, beyond what we could personally oversee. The work stayed hard. The days stayed long. I liked it that way. That fall, Ethan called unexpectedly. I'm moving, he said. Where? I asked. Out west, he said. Different industry. Starting over. That sounds healthy, I said. He hesitated. I wanted you to know. Dad asked about you again. I closed my eyes. What did you say? That you were busy, he said. And that you didn't owe him anything. I smiled. Thank you. He still doesn't understand, Ethan added. But I do. We talked for a while after that. About nothing. About the future. About the fact that silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. That winter, Richard Davenport finally stopped appearing in articles altogether. No updates. No think pieces. No cautionary tales. He became what he feared most. Forgotten. One evening, as I was leaving the office, Linda handed me a manila folder. Just so you know, she said, this is closed. Inside was the final notice from the state. The case officially concluded. Findings implemented. No further action required. I slid the folder into a drawer and shut it. At home, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. The river was low, reflecting the dull yellow of streetlights. I thought about the first day. The watch? The 30 minutes. About how certain he'd been that time was on his side. Time had been on mine instead. Months later, I ran into Brooke Halstead. She was standing in line at a pharmacy, scrolling on her phone, hair pulled back without the careful polish she used to wear like armor. She saw me and froze. Maya, she said. I nodded. She shifted her weight. I heard you're doing well. I'm doing work I believe in, I said. She swallowed. I made mistakes. Yes, I said. I thought proximity was the same as competence, she said, voice tight. I didn't know how much I didn't know. I believed her. It didn't change anything. I hope you learn from it, I said. She nodded, eyes bright, and turned back to the counter. I walked out into the cold air feeling nothing at all. That was the final proof. Not anger, not satisfaction. Nothing. The next spring, Groundwork celebrated its second anniversary quietly. Pizza. Paper plates. Someone brought a cake shaped like a brick. Marcus raised his soda. To systems that don't depend on heroes. We clinked cans. Later, as I locked up, I stood for a moment in the empty office. No marble, no plaques, no names etched in stone. Just work, waiting to be done. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely unafraid of what would happen if I walked away, because I knew now without question that nothing I'd built depended on me alone. And that was the real victory. The email came on an ordinary Wednesday, buried between a calendar reminder and a grocery delivery receipt. Subject: Request for Statement Historical Review. I almost deleted it without opening. Almost. The sender was a graduate student working on a long-term research project about governance failures in publicly funded organizations. She wasn't asking for gossip. She wasn't asking for blame. She wanted context, patterns, what people missed while it was happening. I agreed to talk. We met over video. She was young, serious, careful with her words. She had read everything: public records, policy updates, board minutes. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened without interrupting. Near the end, she hesitated. Can I ask something personal? She said. Yes. Do you think he knew what he was doing? She asked. Or do you think he believed he was right? I thought about Richard Davenport sitting in the grocery store aisle, staring at cans. I think he believed the system was him, I said. And when the system stopped listening, he took it personally. She nodded slowly, like she was fitting that into a larger picture. After we hung up, I sat back and stared at the blank wall of my office. That question stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I felt sympathy, because it clarified something I hadn't named before. People like Richard don't wake up planning to destroy anything. They wake up planning to preserve themselves. Everything else is collateral. Groundwork took on a new kind of project that year. Not a crisis, a transition. A mid-sized nonprofit whose founder was stepping down voluntarily. No scandal, no investigation, just age, and the recognition that it was time. The founder was a woman named Helen. Early 70s. Sharp, funny, tired in a way that wasn't bitter. I don't want this to become about me, she said at our first meeting. I want it to outlive me. We helped her design a transition that didn't revolve around her approval. She insisted on it. Build it so they don't need my permission, she said. Watching that happen felt like watching an alternate universe unfold. One where power loosened its grip willingly. When Helen retired, she threw a party and invited everyone. Board members, staff, volunteers, donors. She stood up, raised a glass, and said, "If you ever miss me, I did something wrong." People laughed. They cried. The organization kept running the next day. That was the model I believed in. That winter, Ethan sent me a photo. A small house. One story. Desert light. Caption: "First place, that's mine." I smiled. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The last loose end came in the form of a letter. Actual paper. Cream-colored. Typed. It arrived one afternoon at the office, addressed to me in careful handwriting. I didn't open it right away. Linda watched me from across the room. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," I said. I opened it anyway. "Maya, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I've spent my life believing that control was responsibility, that without me, everything would collapse. I was wrong. You were never the problem. I don't know how to end this letter. Richard." I read it once. Then again, there was no check, no request, no manipulation, just an ending. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't frame it. I didn't burn it. I put it in a drawer with other finished things. That night, walking home, I passed the old Davenport Communities building. The logo was gone. The lobby had been renovated. New tenants. New name. The stone still bore faint marks where letters had been removed. You could see them if you knew where to look. I stood there for a moment, then kept walking. The next morning, Groundwork's newest hire, a woman fresh out of grad school, knocked on my office door. "I just wanted to say," she said, nervous. "I looked you up before I took the job." I raised an eyebrow. "And? I almost didn't apply," she said. "I thought you'd be scary." I laughed. "Am I?" She smiled. "No, You're precise. I liked that. That afternoon, we wrapped up a project that had taken 6 months. The client sent a thank you note. No fanfare, no drama. Just gratitude. As I shut down my computer, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer measured time from that Tuesday morning. From the 30 minutes. From the collapse. That moment had become a reference point, not a center. It mattered, but it no longer defined anything. I locked the office, stepped out into the evening, and felt the quiet confidence of a life built deliberately, without fear of someone else pulling the ground out from under it. And I knew, with a certainty that felt settled and final, that the story had reached its end not because everything was resolved, but because nothing else needed proving. The consequences had arrived. The systems had changed, and I had moved on. The last time I saw the building, it was raining. Not hard. Not enough to send people running. Just a steady, patient rain that darkened the stone and softened the edges of everything it touched. I was in the neighborhood for a meeting, another advisory session, another board that wanted to fix things before they broke, and I found myself walking the long way back to the train. I didn't plan it. My feet just carried me there. The old Davenport Community's headquarters looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just standing farther away now. The lobby lights were on, but the space behind the glass was different. New furniture, new signage, a different name etched where his had been chiseled out and polished over. People walked in and out without hesitation. No one slowed. No one glanced up at the building like it might decide something about them. I stood under the awning across the street and watched for a minute. That was when I noticed him. Richard Davenport stood on the opposite sidewalk, just outside the reach of the rain, hands in the pockets of a jacket that used to look expensive and now just looked old. He wasn't trying to cross. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was just standing there, eyes fixed on the entrance like it might open on its own and invite him back inside. I didn't approach him. I didn't hide either. We were far enough apart that we could see each other clearly without speaking. The street between us felt wider than it was. After a moment, he looked up and noticed me. There was no shock this time. No tension. Just recognition. He gave a small nod. I returned it. That was it. No words, no apology, no confrontation. I turned and kept walking. The rain followed me down the block, light and steady, soaking into my coat. I didn't rush. I didn't check the time. I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. At the station, I stood on the platform and watched the tracks glisten. The train arrived late, doors sighing open. I stepped inside and took a seat by the window. As the city slid past, I thought about how certain I'd been that day in the conference room, how sure I was that everything I believed to be solid was about to collapse. I hadn't been wrong. I just misunderstood what collapse meant. The building didn't fall. The company didn't implode in a single moment. The world didn't end. What collapsed was the illusion that one man's approval defined my worth. That silence was safety. That endurance was loyalty. Those things fell quietly, like supports you don't notice until they're gone. Groundwork continued its work without me needing to supervise every detail. Marcus took on more leadership. Tasha started teaching full-time, alongside consulting. Linda moved into a mentoring role she'd never had space for before. I took a week off that summer. The first real one in years. I drove north, rented a small cabin near a lake, and spent my mornings walking and my afternoons reading. No cell service, no email, just time. On the third day, sitting on the dock with my feet in the water, I realized something else had ended. The need to explain. I didn't need to justify my choices anymore. I didn't need anyone to understand what I'd survived or what I'd built in response. The story existed whether I told it or not. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I thought about the people who had stood up that day. Marcus, Tasha, Ellen, all the others who quietly pushed back their chairs and followed me out. Not because I asked them to, because they recognized something they couldn't unsee. I thought about Mrs. Alvarez and the mural, and the children's hands reaching upward. About Helen and her retirement party. About the young woman in my workshop who finally left a job that was breaking her. These were the real consequences. The ripples that didn't make headlines. When I returned to the city, a message waited for me from the graduate student I'd spoken to months earlier. Her dissertation had been approved. She wrote, "Your story helped me understand that failure isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet power, refusing to let go." I closed the message and smiled. Years from now, people might forget Richard Davenport's name entirely. They might pass the building without knowing what once stood there, without noticing the faint outlines in the stone. That was fine. What mattered was that the systems he once controlled no longer needed to be dismantled in dramatic ways. They simply worked differently now. And as for me, I woke up every morning without the knot in my chest that had once told me to brace myself. I worked, I rested, I trusted. I no longer measured time in minutes given or taken away. I measured it in mornings that felt calm, in evenings that felt earned, in work that didn't require fear to function. Somewhere behind me, a man was still learning what happens when everything you build depends on being obeyed. Ahead of me, there was nothing to outrun and nothing to prove. Just a life that held together on its own. And that was enough.